You're listening to a podcast by Way Collective, a contemplative community for love and liberation in Santa Barbara, California. This recording was the conversation starter at our Dinner and Dialogue gathering on May 13th, 2026. Thanks for tuning in. All right, so for a few weeks now, we've been circling around this idea of mystery. And we began this series by talking about what we call the big mystery by looking at big history. We zoomed all the way out to look at the vastness of the cosmos and to the incomprehensible reality that our lives are unfolding within something we did not create, we can't fully grasp, and can barely understand. And we said that mystery places us in a fundamentally different relationship to the world. Not a relationship rooted primarily in certainty, but in one of awe or curiosity and wonder. And then last week, we brought that a little closer. We talked about what it means to relate from mystery, how mystery interrupts the stories we create about ourselves and our futures, how it softens our need to control outcomes, how it brings us back to a certain kind of presence. But tonight, I want to bring it even closer still. Tonight, I want to talk about what it means to know the mystery in ourselves and in one another. And I want to say why right at the outset. Because if we can begin to see that another person is not an object to be comprehended or categorized or reduced, but a mystery to be encountered, then something vital shifts in all of us. We enter into a different kind of relationship altogether with a subject, a relationship rooted in compassion, in curiosity, and in chosen connection. Because the moment we reduce ourselves or another person to a label, whatever that label may be, we lose something precious in the process. We lose the complexity and aliveness of one another. And I know I've used this quote from Catherine Keller before, but I keep returning to it because something in it feels deeply true. She says, "To know myself is to know that I cannot literally know myself. For in the act of knowing, I am only just coming to be." Isn't that still remarkable? I think what she's getting at is this. The me that I am right now is different from the me I was just a moment ago. And this is always true. Now, certainly there is continuity, right? Same body, same brain, same memories. There's a thread running through our lives. But there's also something equally true. We are always changing, always evolving, and always unfolding. So the question becomes, is our personhood something fixed in the past? Or is our personhood found in this continual unfolding? I think there's a good argument to be made that our personhood is actually in our novelty, in the fact that we are not finished yet, because that's what makes us alive. And if that's true, then one way of describing the mystery in ourselves and others is simply this: we are always more than we think we are. I think one way to define mystery is that it's this precise point where we are self-transcending, where something new is still emerging in us. And if we can begin to see this in ourselves and others, then we are upholding something precious, because we are upholding something alive. And really, life is what this is all about, tending gently to life. You know, the scriptures say too, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old has passed away, and behold, the new has come." That's from 2 Corinthians 5. Perhaps then, to see from Christ's consciousness is to see everyone in the possibility of their newness. The American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow also once wrote, "If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each one's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility." And I want to invite us into a little thought experiment about that tonight, because we can do a couple of things with that insight, right? First, we can apply it to ourselves. We can apply it to our own histories of pain and confusion and wounding, to the moments that shaped us or the things people never saw, the griefs we had to carry privately or the fears we learned to hide. And when we do that, something softens, right? We realize, oh, there's more going on in me than I usually admit. But then we can also apply that insight outward, right? To our partners, to our friends, to our coworkers. And suddenly they become more mysterious too, more complex and less reducible. But then we can actually take it one step further. Think of the person who, in your mind, represents everything you dislike, right? The personification of evil. The person who makes you tense up, the one who causes you to huff and puff and roll your eyes and feel your whole body tighten, the person you've already concluded things about. Now imagine with me that Longfellow's quote is true of them too. What if beneath all of that there's deep sorrow or wounding or fear or confusion? Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that if we've been hurt or abused, that it's our responsibility to reconnect with the humanity of our abusers in some unsafe or naive way. Please don't hear that. Boundaries matter, safety matters, justice matters. But what I am saying is that mystery reminds us there is always more going on in ourselves and others than we can ever know from the surface. And ultimately, the deeper invitation there is compassion. I know that many of us know that Richard Rohr reframes the human condition not around original sin, but around the reality that we all have inherited wounds, that we all carry them, personal wounds, generational wounds, cultural or societal wounds. I was actually recently listening to some material on epigenetics, and researchers were talking about how pregnant mothers who lived through a time of famine pass stress responses and food insecurity patterns down biologically to their children and even their grandchildren. But also that what they found was when future generations were raised in conditions of safety and nourishment, those traits began to dissipate in subsequent generations. Isn't that fascinating? It means that our wounds don't just live in our minds, they live in our bodies, in our nervous systems, and in societies. And if we do not transform and integrate those wounds in order to help heal them, we tend to transmit them on to our children, to our communities, and to one another. And I wonder with you if one of the wounds that we carry collectively, perhaps another evolutionary biological holdover, is punitiveness. This deep assumption that those who do wrong simply just deserve to suffer. And honestly, that's often easier, right? It's easier to punish than to heal. It's easier to close off than to stay curious. It's easier to reduce someone to the worst thing they've done than to ask what conditions created so much pain in the first place. Because compassion is difficult, and real compassion asks something of us. It asks us to see beyond our surface level experiences, even of hurt. And this is where mystery becomes essential, because mystery refuses reduction. Mystery says no person can be collapsed into a single moment or label or ideology or wound or failure. There's another author by the name of Andreas Weber in his book, The Biology of Wonder, and he writes this. He says, because of our mirror neurons, those things that live in your stomach that, like when you're scrolling Instagram and you see somebody get hurt in a video, your stomach fires. You know what I'm talking about? He says, because of these mirror neurons we all have, every living being automatically, by being alive and having a body, is hardwired for empathy. All these experiences, he says, accumulate in the core self, which is pure expression. And this space isn't reserved for the individual. It's where all selves meet. And I love that. This space is where all selves meet because I think many contemplative traditions point toward this same reality, this deeper place beneath the ego, beneath performance, beneath the wounds, where we are all connected together. It's what Richard Schwartz calls the capital S self in IFS. It's what Rohr calls the true self, or what others might simply call the soul. And this is why reducing ourselves or others to wounds is so dangerous, because wounds are real, but they are never the totality of who we are. And honestly, I think this is part of what Adrienne Marie Brown is getting at when she says that we live in a cancel culture, and we essentially cancel each other because we do not believe in our own complexity. We do not believe that we can navigate conflict and struggle in principled ways. She thinks we can only handle binary thinking, good and bad, innocent and guilty, angel and abuser, and black and white. And that's such an important insight because Mystery lives in the realm of non-duality, not moral relativism, not pretending harm doesn't matter, but refusing to flatten human beings into binaries. And so I wonder with you tonight, what kind of world and what kind of relating becomes possible when we stop reducing one another? What kind of relationships become possible when we approach each other not as conclusions, but instead as living mysteries? Because maybe the deepest truth is this: none of us are fully knowable, not even to ourselves. And strangely enough, that's not what separates us, but rather it's actually what connects us, is this mystery. Because every single person you meet is carrying unseen griefs, unspoken fears, unlived possibilities, and also this emerging creativity and beauty that often goes untapped or unnoticed. And every one of us in this room is more than the surface we encounter, including you and me. So perhaps the invitation tonight is simply to begin relating from an awareness of the mystery that is shared by all of us, that deep point of connection where, as Weber says, all selves meet. Perhaps that awareness might allow us to hold ourselves a little more gently, to hold others a little more openly, and to leave room for surprise or room for transformation and room for life to still emerge in ourselves and one another. Because when we make room for mystery in ourselves and others, we stop trying so hard to possess each other in some fixed or certain term, and instead we begin to meet one another with reverence, as sacred locations where creative expression is still unfolding and overflowing. We contain multitudes, as another poet has said. And so perhaps part of our work is to let one another remain multitudinous. It's hard to put into words, but I think it's precisely in that multitudinousness, that complexity, that aliveness, that unfinishedness, where our dignity and value really reside. Do you see that? Have you ever watched someone shrink up inside themselves, someone who can no longer see their multitudinousness or their potential beyond their current situation or what's happened to them in the past or beyond the story they've come to believe about themselves? We get stuck and we start to shrink in. And we all struggle with this, but it's often easiest to recognize in someone else, right? Our children or our friends or those who feel stuck and are unable to imagine that something new could still emerge from their lives. Our great awakening, our great belovedness is in the fact that we are a mystery, that we are here, alive and breathing and unfinished. And compassion truly begins to form in us when we have eyes to see one another in that light. All right, I'm looking forward to talking about this with you all around the tables tonight. So here are 3 contemplative questions for conversation. The first question is the self question. Where in your life do you most tend to reduce yourself to a label, wound, failure, or some kind of fixed identity? The second question is the sacred question. Can you think of a time when someone saw more in you than you were able to see in yourself? And what was it like to open yourself to seeing that in yourself? And lastly, the society question. How does remembering that others carry unseen wounds or histories affect the way you think about compassion or conflict at a societal level? Thanks for listening to this podcast by Way Collective. To keep up with our community, you can subscribe to this podcast, visit www.waycollective.org, or follow us on Instagram at @waycollective. Peace and every good, y'all.